You do not own the land you live on. You do not control the price of housing, electricity, education, or healthcare. You do not decide the rules, but every month you pay rent, interest, and fees as if you did. No sword, no crown, no master. But the terms of your life are still governed by an invisible structure. Access first, ownership maybe. This is not an accident. It is a system, one with ancient roots and modern upgrades. And the more you look at it, the more it starts to resemble something we were taught no longer exists. When we hear the word feudalism, we imagine kingdoms, armored knights, stone castles, lords and peasants tending the land. It feels like ancient history, outdated, something we escaped. But that image is not the full story. Feudalism, at its core, was not about titles or ceremony. It was about control, specifically control over productive assets. In feudal Europe, that asset was land. Everything flowed from it: food, housing, protection, power. If you owned land, you controlled livelihoods. If you did not, your path was predetermined. People did not labor for wealth. They labored for access to a farm, shelter, or protection from violence. The peasant did not own the field he worked. He worked so that he could remain on it. In return for loyalty and labor, the landowner provided not opportunity but stability. That was the trade, obligation for survival. Debt was not written on paper, it was baked into life itself. Despite how unequal it sounds, that system persisted for centuries. Why? Because it was stable. Everyone knew their role. Landowners kept their influence. Peasants survived, even if they never advanced. Mobility was rare. Resistance was costly. Disruption was dangerous. That is what feudalism truly was, a structured economy of dependence. Not chaotic, but ordered. Not fair, but functional. A world where control flowed from owning what others needed to live. It did not collapse because it was inefficient. It collapsed only when a new force, capital, temporarily made ownership less important than production. But the logic behind it, that never really disappeared. Feudalism began to unravel not because it was unfair, but because it was outcompeted. The rise of capital and industry in the 18th and 19th centuries shifted the center of economic power away from land. Factories took precedence over farms, cities overtook manors, smokestacks replaced spires. And most importantly, labor started to matter. For the first time, people could earn income without owning land, without pledging loyalty to a landowner, and without being born into privilege. Wages, not inheritance, became the passport to survival. Hard work could, in theory, lead to ownership over time. This was the great economic unlock, the foundation of the modern middle class. People migrated to cities, took jobs in growing industries, and slowly acquired assets, homes, savings, pensions. The old exchange of loyalty for access was replaced by money for goods, labor for wages, and credit for dreams. Mobility became possible, not guaranteed, but thinkable. The economic models of the 19th and 20th centuries expanded ownership: a house, a retirement fund, a college education. For a historical moment, people not only worked, they progressed, and they believed that was the new normal. But what most people missed was an uncomfortable truth. This window wasn't a permanent system. It was a rare historical phase, one where labor generated enough income to compete with ownership, at least for a while. Because even as factories grew and wages rose, ownership never lost its power. It simply changed forms. Land turned into capital, institutions replaced lords, and the new access came with new terms. For a moment, we escaped dependence, but the structure we escaped from? It was not dead, it was just evolving. Feudal power never truly disappeared, it just changed its wardrobe. As the industrial age gave way to the information age, ownership evolved. Land was no longer the only asset that mattered, but the underlying logic of ownership remained intact.
Factories became corporations. Cropland became real estate portfolios. Community infrastructure, water systems, power grids, internet cables quietly moved onto private balance sheets. By the end of the 20th century, many of the systems people thought were public had become financial instruments, not roads to independence, but streams of rent, fees, and passive income for those who were already positioned to own. And as capital became more mobile than labor, a familiar pattern emerged. Assets appreciated, wages stagnated. The modern participant no longer owed crops to a landowner, but they still owed something. Monthly rent, installments, subscriptions, premiums, penalties, debt. It was no longer called obligation, it was called opportunity. But the effect was the same: access without permanence, participation without power. Today, most people rent their lives, not because they failed, but because the cost of ownership has been structurally pushed just out of reach. Housing became an investment vehicle. Education became a loan contract. Healthcare became a billing system. Even software turned into a subscription, a recurring charge to access tools you never fully own. You can move homes, switch jobs, cancel apps, but the structure is the same. You now pay to stay connected to survival. And the people who own the platforms, the systems, and the assets, they do not need to force your loyalty. Like a modern version of feudal control, the system ensures you return each month willingly, because the alternative is disconnection. The castles are gone, but the gates never left.
Today's economic system does not call itself feudal. It calls itself flexible. It offers mobility, choice, and freedom of movement. But beneath the language, the structure has not changed as much as it pretends. In the past, peasants knew their role. They exchanged labor for protection. They stayed because they had no alternative. In the present, workers believe they are free. But every key function of modern life, from housing and education to healthcare and digital access, now exists behind a payment wall. We do not call it servitude, we call it a mortgage. We do not call it fealty, we call it a subscription. We do not call it a tax on independence, we call it a credit score. The replacement isn't spoken in threats, it is written in small print. You can participate in modern society as long as you keep paying. Miss a payment, and the cost is not physical punishment, it is exclusion. From homes, from schools, from services, from opportunity itself. And the most effective part of this system? People are told this dependency is empowerment. Debt is framed as investment. Rent is sold as flexibility. We mistake the freedom to choose between obligations as actual liberty. But just because you can choose the terms of your dependency does not mean you are free from it. Like old feudal systems, this one presents alternatives that all point back to the center. You keep moving, keep optimizing, yet always remain entangled in a loop where assets are unreachable and ownership is deferred indefinitely. Modern dependency no longer wears chains. Now it wears choice. When the system breaks, it shows you what it really values. In every major economic crisis, from housing crashes to inflation waves, we see the same pattern. The system moves quickly, not to protect participants, but to stabilize assets. Banks are bailed out, housing markets are propped up. Liquidity flows upward, not outward. The people holding wealth are insulated. The people depending on wages are told to wait. This is not an accident, it is a design. The modern economy treats ownership as structural. It must be defended. But participation is conditional and easily replaced. You can pay into the system your whole life, rent, tax, interest. But when instability hits, your payments do not buy you protection. They buy you a seat at a table where the rules have already been set. This is how modern hierarchy survives, not by enforcing loyalty, but by preserving advantage. In a moment of collapse, the system rushes to save the real estate market, not the renter. It defends the pension fund, not the gig worker. It floods capital markets while families wait in food bank lines. No one states this directly, but the pattern speaks for itself. The system does not prioritize the people who keep it running. It prioritizes the assets that keep it structured. And every bailout, every policy, every silent reinforcement of institutional wealth teaches the same thing. Ownership is protected, dependency is managed, and participation is tolerated as long as it does not threaten structure. Feudalism did not end when the castles fell. It ended when ownership widened, when people could participate in wealth, not just survive around it. And it returned quietly when that ownership began to narrow again. The terms have changed. There are no lords or lands, but the structure, access without ownership, labor without leverage, has returned in familiar form. People today are not irrational. They are anxious because the economic promise they were raised on no longer matches the reality they live in. They work, they produce, they contribute, but the rewards drift upward. And the tools they are given, credit, rent, subscription, debt, are disguises for dependence. This is not collapse, it is equilibrium, an equilibrium built to preserve structure and protect ownership. Understanding Feudalism 2.0 is not about rejecting modern life. It is about recognizing that history evolves, but it rarely forgets. Power does not disappear, it reorganizes. And once you see that, you stop blaming yourself and start seeing the system.